It seems like it's been 40 weeks since you got 40 winks. Your back pain? Unbearable. Tossing, turning, trying to find that pain-free position. And that's the moment you realize you can't spend another waking moment putting off treatment.
The Joint and Spine Center is Cincinnati's leading destination for spine care, with a ton of surgical and non-surgical treatments for back pain. So when a moment has the power to change the rest of your life, go to the one place with the power to change it for the better, the Christ Hospital Health Network. This changes everything.
The Pound This Podcast is brought to you by the Christ Hospital Health Network. This is the Pound This Podcast, episode 567. In case you missed it, Tween Week, Dr. Ashley Solomon on body image.
I want to lose weight, but I don't know how to get started.
What should I meal prep every week?
How do I get those sweet booty gains?
Inspiration for your healthy lifestyle. The Pound This Podcast with Amanda Valentine.
Thank you so much for listening to the Pound This Podcast. I'm Amanda Valentine, and this is an In Case You Missed It episode. So this is a replay from last year where I did a series called Tween Week, where it was a week talking to tweens about various topics that they chose that they wanted to talk about. And this episode goes in tandem with the one previous to this. So if you're just listening to this episode with Dr. Ashley Solomon, I would recommend that you would go back to episode 566 and listen to the girls talk about body image. And this is paired with that where Dr. Ashley Solomon talks about some of the things these girls said, also some advice for parents, advice for young girls. If you want to go listen to the entire Tween Week, those are episodes 368 through 375. And those aired around this time last year. I think that they're really important episodes to listen to, giving these tweens a voice to talk about things they find important to them, and a conversation that I feel like we should be having. So if you want to go check all those episodes out, that's where you'll find them. And here we go. Let's get into the replay episode with Dr. Ashley Solomon. My guest is Dr. Ashley Solomon, a clinical psychologist. And I had you listen to the podcast that I did with the two little girls about their body image, and I wanted to have an expert speak to kind of what you thought about that, give some advice for kids, some advice for parents. So since you are my expert, if you could tell me what you do, tell me your background, how you work with kids and parents, etc.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on. And I was really honored to have a chance to listen to what these girls shared. They were super honest and vulnerable, and I think really spoke to a lot of what so many young people experience, in our culture. So my focus and background has been in working with people with eating-related challenges in their life and body image issues. So that's really what I've done for my whole career as a psychologist. And I have an organization called Gallia Collaborative that I founded that is really dedicated to working with girls and women in particular to help them really restore their power, is what I often say. And I think that food and body-related issues are such strong drainers of power, specifically for women and girls in our society. So these issues come up all the time. And I work with a lot of people with eating disorders and a lot of teenagers and their families in particular, in kind of helping them navigate that process.
So whenever you're listening to these girls who are 10 and 11 talking about how they view themselves and the kind of their place in the world, I mean, what were your initial feelings? I'm sure it's very familiar to what you hear every day.
It's super familiar, and it never ceases to be heartbreaking, to be honest. We were talking a little bit before we started about how relatable, just as a woman in our society, as women in our society, so much of what they shared was. I mean, that pain of insecurity, that focus on, and the fear around the way that other people are perceiving them. Mm-hmm. So it was, despite hearing these themes all the time, it's never easy to hear how much sort of pain, especially these young people, are walking around with on a daily basis, and and kind of frighteningly, how they can turn that on themselves into these really potentially unhealthy behaviors that can do a lot of damage.
Well, we were also discussing before we started recording that these are feelings that we have both felt ourselves.
Yep.
I mean, especially as, that being that age, I can clearly remember being that age and feeling and thinking exactly those same things that those girls were saying.
Totally.
And worse.
Right.
Of like, wow, just I'm 37 years old and I'm still battling body image issues and how I talk to myself and how I view myself, and to be like, wow, it's been going on this long, that conversation with myself started at 10 years old. So, I mean, when you're that young and you're feeling those sorts of things, I mean, is there a way to really kind of get started off on the right foot so you're not 37 years old and still feeling these sorts of things about yourself? Is there a conversation you can have with yourself right now at 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 that can really put you on the path of having great body confidence?
Yeah, that's so important. Like we were talking about, it's painful to remember how isolating a lot of those feelings were at that time. And so I think that, I mean, that's one piece right there, is that what I loved about what these girls shared was that, well, I love the fact that they shared, first of all, and that they had this like strong desire to put this message out into the world.
They're so brave. They're awesome.
So brave. And there's so many ways, even without going on a podcast, to do that and to share that more openly. That's actually one of the things that I feel so excited and kind of pumped up about our current kind of adolescent teenage population, because I mean, we have a lot of research to show that these are kids that are more receptive to mental health treatment, to thinking about their mental health, to talking with each other about problems than any generation in history. So I think that there's a lot to be kind of excited about in terms of, we know that connection is so powerful. And so, to those 10, 11-year-olds, I mean, even younger, I mean, I remember this starting for me in like first grade, having such negative perceptions of my body. And but to these young people, I think one of the most powerful things to do is just to talk about it. Well, even if it's just with peers, as a place to start, because I think that honestly, the worst thing that can happen is to feel so alone and to feel like you are so abnormal or different. And I love that the two girls on the show were able to like confide in each other and shared that experience, as painful as it was, and they could sort of build each other up too. I think the other thing is recognizing, and I mean, I think as adults, we would like to recognize that there's so many qualities and aspects to ourselves, outside of our physical appearance. But, recognizing that, especially at that age and at, the vulnerable time of adolescence, where pre-adolescence even, that there's almost nothing more important in the world than acceptance and connection with people. So anything that feels like it's going to threaten that, like not sort of fitting into some standard physically or things like that, is going to feel like the absolute focus. So it's hard to break through that, because partly we're wired that way. We're wired in adolescence to start caring so much about what other people perceive of us. But I think that to those kids, especially if they're listening, I mean, I would say that remembering that there are so many aspects of yourself that are so much, honestly, more interesting and important than the way that you appear to the world, whether that's, how creative you are, or what your interests are, what your values are, things you like to do, and really working to kind of cultivate those things is going to be so much more powerful than investing in, the way that I look in this moment. Because too, inevitably, during that time, I mean, our bodies are going to shift and change no matter what we do. It's part of adolescence that we expect weight gain, for example. And so if we're so invested in, staying at a particular weight or kind of restricting what we're eating, I mean, we're working against our biology at that point too. I mean, honestly, same thing for women who are going through, midlife, like our bodies are naturally designed to like change and evolve. And we'd like to think that they're going to stay like a particular way if we can just sort of control them enough. And it's just not going to happen. So we're setting ourselves up for a lot of frustration.
Well, and I think it's, to your point of focusing on the things other than weight, taking myself back to that age, if I could and talk to myself, which don't we all wish we could do that and give ourselves some advice, that I can remember clearly, like in third grade, I was, for show and tell, I did these funny skits. And I was like, I loved making people laugh and being funny. And then for some reason, like there was this switch that flipped. And I became extremely quiet and shy and didn't do that anymore. And then I just focused on, I'm so fat and ugly and I want boys to pay attention to me and they don't. And I never focused on, hey, you're funny. You can make a whole room laugh. You can do these cool things. Right. That completely went away. And I never focused on that. All I did was focus on everything I thought was wrong with me and my body and the way that I looked. So I think that, if I had a time machine and I could go back and really appreciate that about myself, I think it would have dug me out of this hole so much quicker and really put me on a better path than to just focus on what I look like on the outside rather than focus on who I am as a person, what I have to offer.
Right. And I don't know if you had this in your life, but I think it is really powerful if there are people who are recognizing that and like cultivating that, even when you are, you're the third grader starting to focus more on other things and having people that can help kind of reshift your focus back to like, this is an amazing thing about you. You are so gifted in this. I want to like help you cultivate it and help you, show the world what an amazing person you are, I think is so powerful. But for lots of reasons, lots of kids don't have that experience or, and they're not talking about it. And so, it's easy to like fly under the radar with like how much that's affecting them.
Well, so another kind of wrench thrown into the equation now, talking about in 2019, is we have social media. That's a part of it. So now it's not only the kids in the classroom in the neighborhood, it's you're putting yourself on the whole internet. And I know the girls in the conversation that I had with them, that they kind of had their own little argument about social media. And they weren't fully fledged. They didn't have phones yet, and they weren't on social media, which I know isn't true of every 10 and 11-year-old.
Right. And
so if you're that age, how do you come at social media?
Right. Yeah. It's so fraught. It's such a landmine, honestly. And I think that's why, and I know for some parents listening, you might be feeling like, well, we're beyond that. We're beyond the idea of like not letting my kid have a phone. They've had one, all of that. But I will just say as a broader comment that the longer that you can delay that, the better. I think we all know that to some degree, but I mean, the reason for that is that, these skills, these mental skills that it takes to be able to like filter out like what's truth and what's fiction and, how
it's hard to do that as an adult.
Impacting me. Right. Those aren't really... our brains aren't even fully formed until they're 26, 27 years old. So when you think about that and you're putting this like insane tool in the hands of, a young kid that's just so powerful in the way that it can affect them and their effect on other people, it's our culture has a lot of work to do around that and how we kind of relate to that. But, despite our best efforts, kids are obviously connected to social media and it's a big part of their culture and the way that they relate to each other. I think actually my dissertation research many years ago was going into schools and teaching girls about how to have media literacy. So understanding the way that they're like taking in media and more critically kind of evaluating it. At that time, it was not totally pre-social media, but it wasn't what it was today.
Like MySpace, Friendster?
Right, yeah, right. So, we were honestly talking more about, movies and magazine ads, but the same concepts really still apply about there are things that parents, educators can teach kids and that kids can be utilizing themselves in terms of just taking more of a critical view of what they're digesting and what they're taking in. And also to recognize, I think so many of us, again, adults included, like we forget that there's like an unsubscribe button or an unfriend button. And like we just sort of subject ourselves to things that like make us feel like garbage over and over again without thinking about the fact that you know, no one's forcing us to take that in on a daily basis. And how is that impacting my, you know, the way that I'm looking at myself? And so then when I think about kids in particular, there can feel like there's social implications to that. Like if I don't, you know, if I defriend this person or I'm not following them, will I be able to like stay up to date with like what other people are talking about? And part of that goes back to, I think in terms of addressing that is going back to like kids finding their tribe too, thinking about who do I connect with in real life and what are the values that we share, and are those, you know, my close friends, like thinking about these two girls doing the podcast, like is my closest friend or somebody that I trust really going to judge me for that? And if, you know, the answer is no, then that should have more importance than the perception of, you know, some stranger online or someone you barely know. But again, it's a hard time. It's a hard time because we're wired to be really cognizant of what everyone else is thinking. So limits are really helpful. I mean, even self-imposed limits for kids to recognize, like, how much time am I really spending online?
Well, your phone will tell you that.
Yeah,
I'm afraid
your
to
phone
look at
will
that.
tell you, and you can limit it, and you can set up, you know, if you're noticing like, wow, like I'm not getting other stuff done, or I've stopped like having time for other things I enjoy, like, you know, you can like put self-imposed limits on like having the app turn off automatically or Instagram shut down or whatever, send you a notification. So you don't have to rely, or I mean, obviously, as most of us know now, like social media, gaming, all of that is designed around being very addictive. You know, it's designed to like reinforce the parts of our brains or make the parts of our brains light up, that same as in any other sort of addictive process where, you know, we are compelled to like keep going and not stopping. So we sort of have to have external things to remind us like, hey, there's this big world out there and this isn't everything.
Well, I think you brought up such a great point too. And I think this is very truthful for adults of pay attention to what you're following and how it makes you feel. If you get into a comparison game trap, or how come I don't look like that, or how come I don't have that, and I should be this way because they are, and you know, I'm older than them and I should have been at this point already. Any of that stuff, I feel like, again, like you said, unfollow no matter what age you are, because that's not inspiring you at that point. That's not a motivator. That's making you feel like garbage, and you don't need that in your life. And I think that when it's so easy to mindlessly scroll and just have those feelings and not really address it or think about it. But if you do that and then just clean house and unfollow, I mean, half of those people that I feel like make you feel that way, you don't know anyway.
Right.
And
it's
so
amazing.
Get rid of them.
Right. Sometimes I talk to people about kind of recognizing the difference between like helpful and unhelpful envy, because we tend to like think about envy as just like one emotion, but really you can kind of think about it as there's the type of envy that just makes you feel like crap about yourself and, you know, become more demoralized or demotivated. And then there's the kind of envy where it's like, this person has accomplished things that are really inspiring, and I want to learn from them, and it can be actually very motivating. And so even kind of like recognizing the difference in your social media feed of like, if you're feeling that sense of like, ugh, I wish I had what they have, there's even a nuance in there of like, but then does that make you feel like less like trying or more like trying?
Yeah.
And is it a healthy thing that you are, you know, aspiring to? Is it achievable for you? Is it realistic? Is it based in your values? All of those are good questions to kind of ask.
So is that a realistic conversation that parents can have with kids though?
Yeah, I mean, I think potentially in their language, I think that they certainly understand like what it means to, you know, look at other people and wish that they had certain things that you know, other people might have. And I think one of like the conversation can go towards like, what is it about X person that makes you feel that sense of jealousy or envy? And sometimes I think we think that it might be the way that they look or the way that they, that the attention that they're getting. And I go back to what I was saying earlier about if we can kind of engage them in a conversation, oftentimes it can get down or deep enough to the level of like, yeah, you really want to feel accepted. You want to feel connected to people. You want to feel like you have people that you like trust and support you. Like, how do we help you feel more of that versus how do we help you lose weight to be a certain size because you think that that's what's going to lead to more connection and acceptance.
So since you bring that up, so how do parents cross that bridge with, like talking about just like losing weight, or even with the girls in the podcast, she brought up the fear of getting diabetes, of, if your child is having, a health issue or a weight issue or, a body image issue, like what's the best plan of attack to talk to them about it and make them feel better?
Yeah. Oh, there's so much there. I think I always say that the very first thing I think as, parents or caregivers that we have to recognize is noticing where our urge to step in is coming from. Because if it's coming from, for many of us, I think it comes from a place of fear on our own parts because maybe we've struggled with weight and felt like we've battled against it our whole lives and we want to spare our kids from that experience. Or doctor has said something to us, the pediatrician has said something to us about, worrying about our kids' weight or what it's doing. And so I think we have to look hard before we engage in any kind of conversation or trying to do something different with our kids and looking at like, what's inspiring my urge here? Am I feeling kind of triggered by my own experiences and maybe even like trauma around some of these issues? Is the fear about like what the health outcomes could be really legitimate? So once we, have gotten a little bit more clarity on that, I think that, we can come from a more neutral place where we're not kind of projecting all of our own stuff on our kids. Which is super important. And I think that one of the things we know is that it's almost never helpful. I mean, we know this from research, certainly experience, but there's been some good research to tell us that it's almost never helpful to talk to kids directly about weight. One of the things I often share is that the American Pediatric Association actually like issued guidelines a year or two ago saying like doctors should not be talking to kids about weight loss because not only is it ineffective in helping them lose weight, but it's actually more harmful and it can cause things like eating disorders, low self-esteem. And we're not actually in doing that, like giving kids the tools to be healthier or to feel like they even know what to do to like feel better about themselves or to be healthy. So I recommend not talking to kids directly about weight, first of all, even if as a parent you might be feeling concerned about that, thinking more about things like how do I support my kids in getting more physical activity and doing the things that they love and feeling accepted and feeling loved. Those things have a much higher correlation to health outcomes than even weight does. If we can, address, especially I know one of the girls on the podcast was talking about her anxiety. And if we can help to address some of these like underlying feelings and mental health issues, these kids are going to be a lot healthier, feel better about themselves, then be more likely to make good choices for themselves in their life, be more active, be more engaged, and like with friends and things like that. That's going to have a much more powerful impact on their long-term health. So if we want to have a conversation with, our kids about how they're feeling, I think we have to first recognize that most kids are not going to open up to us the first time. Yeah. They're going to say, oh, I'm so glad you asked. I've been wanting to share all of this for so long. But I will say that even putting it out there that you are open and this is something you recognize and want to talk about may not be the first time, but it opens a door for a conversation. And the other thing I say is that you sharing some of your own imperfections, insecurities, like that modeling that like it's safe and welcome to talk about feelings or not feeling good enough or rejection, like in our family and in our house, is sometimes a lot more powerful than like asking directly, like, tell me how you feel about your body. What's going on?
Yeah.
How are people treating you?
But I guess I want to interject there for a second. I would imagine part of that by sharing your own insecurities wouldn't be like, oh, I look so fat in these jeans.
Yeah, really good point.
Yeah.
Really good point. I think that really, I mean, honestly, I really talk to parents about trying to avoid any kind of, weight-based comments about self, because that's just that like little, that becomes our kids' internal voices. Like I have my mom's, voice certainly in my head, kind of underlying things I think about myself. So absolutely. I think it could be more about, I felt really at work, I felt really hurt today when someone, said something that wasn't very nice. And I was struggling with like how to deal with that. And then this is what I ended up doing. Mm-hmm. So you're kind of modeling like, how do I, we all experience like difficult feelings. It's hard for all of us, and it's okay to talk about them. And we can model like how we cope with them in ways hopefully that, aren't, because the thing we in our culture, going back to the idea of weight, I mean, we do use food very maladaptively and in ways that, kind of compensate for other ways of trying to deal with feeling. So I feel angry, I feel sad, I go to food because it's effective and it's soothing. But
that's me written all over it.
Yeah. And I think, that's something I think back when I was a kid, like I don't think I struggled with binge eating and weight and body image and all of that. Like it's really effective to numb our feelings with food. Mm-hmm. And if we're doing that chronically and repetitively, then we're not only is that causing a problem, but we're never learning that there are potentially other ways, even more effective ways of feeling better.
So what are the more effective ways?
Yeah. So obviously so individual to a person, but I think it really starts with recognizing emotions, because when we go so quickly from I feel distress or I feel upset to numbing that out, we never really even learn. Like so many of us don't even have like a real like emotional vocabulary. Like we say like I feel good or I feel bad. Yeah. But we don't know like all the variability in there. And so I think the first kind of piece of it is figuring out like what is it that I'm feeling, and then every feeling, and teach people that every feeling is associated with a need state, something that we need to do, or an urge that we have to like address that feeling. So if we feel guilt, our need is to like make amends because we've done something wrong, for example. So like what the coping is, eventually is getting to the point where we can like recognize what is it that I'm feeling and like what's actually going to make that better, instead of just like covering it up or burying it. And then we end up feeling so much more effective. But sometimes before that, just because like our emotions are so high, like we're totally stressed out, we're totally overwhelmed. I mean, coming up with like our own kind of stress relievers. I think sometimes we talk a lot about like self-care as like, taking a long bath or getting a massage or whatever. And that can be self-care, but it's also like stuff that we can do like in the moment to like bring our emotionality down. It's like daily practices and like things that don't necessarily have to feel like indulgent or whatever, but it'd be like, oh, I actually said no to a request today, and that was what I needed to do to like bring my stress level down and be able to, not feel so out of control, where then maybe my urge is to like turn to food to like, feel more in control of myself.
So talking about parents having a conversation with kids about body image and kind of going in there, how do you get into that? But what if, your kids don't ever open up to you? Like, I don't know. I mean, my mom never had that conversation with me. And even if she tried, I'm not sure if I ever would. talk to her about it. So then what kind of is your solution then? Or how do you even know that they're dealing with this? Are there signs to look for of they might be dealing with this? And then if they don't talk to you, how do you find a solution?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that in terms of signs, one of the things that is, it might not be specific to they're struggling with body image or they're struggling with like eating issues or weight or those sorts of things, but just mental health in general. I mean, we see social isolation as like the key kind of thing to watch for. So going back once again to, we're beings that are designed to be connected with other people. So when we're isolating ourselves or, stopping doing things that we enjoy, that's a red flag that like something's not going well. And we want to kind of intervene at that point. And I mean, certainly any changes in eating behavior. I mean, a lot of kids go through like periods of like, I'm cutting out meat or doing this particular thing with how I eat. But I think that, and a lot of times I think we kind of chalk that up to like, oh, this is a phase. This is what a lot of the kids at school are doing. But I would take that seriously, especially if it really feels like a change for your kid. Certainly if they're feeling down or more self-conscious about the way that they look, if they're refusing to like go places where, to the pool over the summer. I mean, those could definitely be signs, obviously, that something is up with how they're feeling about their bodies. And I think you're totally right that I think for most of us, it's never a comfortable conversation to talk about that. And so they might not be willing to really get into it. And sometimes the best thing that I think we can do is, again, model that it's okay to talk about like hard things within our household so that they know that that's like a welcome thing. But also to really, potentially if you're concerned, connecting them with a therapist, even as a place to start, if you notice that they connect to a neighbor or a certain teacher and encouraging them that it's okay if you don't want to share some of this with me, but I really hope that you're talking about it. And I hope that you know that I support you in talking to someone and here's somebody that could be a really good listener for you, that's really interested. And I mean, I'm a huge therapy advocate, obviously. And I think sometimes we like wait until things, feel like they've gotten really bad and there's like really more severe issues going on before we kind of think about that as an option. But it is so helpful. I sometimes think about how we do so much, we strive to do so much for like preventative healthcare with our physical health, and we talk about like all the things that we need to do to help maintain our physical health on a daily basis, and we go get our flu shot every year and all of those things, but that we have to be doing the same things for our like mental and emotional health too. And so even if it doesn't seem like there's a major problem, it could be really helpful just to check in with a therapist or to start kind of journaling about your feelings and, to really kind of take control of your mental health in a way that's more proactive.
Well, I think that one of the things that holds people back from that, I'm just saying this as an adult, and I imagine same thing for kids. Well, I think probably two things. Yeah. One, price. Yep. But then if you think if it's an investment in your health and it's going to make you better, I think that's such a good way to frame that of like, you're not lighting money on fire, like you're making things better. Right. And two, I think, and this is, an issue I have because I don't have a therapist of like, where do I even start? What do I do? Just Google therapist? And then like you're going to get like 10 pages of like, how do I know who's the person I feel comfortable with? And then, do I have to go out of my way and then meet them? And then do I go twice and realize they're not my person? And then I have to go search from somebody else? It just seems like so overwhelming that you don't even start because you don't even know step one unless you know somebody who knows somebody sort of thing, Right.
It's such a good and valid points you're making. I mean, we obviously there could be a whole discussion about our broken mental health care system and, the inaccessibility. And there's tons of barriers to that, which, I want to really acknowledge. I think when we're thinking about, even within school systems and for kids, even if there is a guidance counselor or, therapy accessible through school, there can be all kinds of barriers to that, or it might be very short term and not really sort of fully address what the needs are. So that's definitely the case. I think that there certainly are some options out there, and it's a complicated system, and I wish that it wasn't. I think that, one thing you said about if I happen to know somebody, I think it kind of goes back to this stigma that we have about some of these issues. I do think if we were talking about them more, we discover how many people truly are, connected to a therapist or struggling with the same thing, and we might actually have more of an opportunity to hear about who's available, who's out there, and things like that if we were talking about it more.
That seems something adults hide away. If you see a therapist, you're, and obviously broad stroke statement here, but of just like, I don't want anybody to know. They're going to be like, what's wrong with you?
Right.
And like, it's just this, which I feel like that is becoming less and less with a younger generation of just like, no, you should talk to somebody. This is good for you.
Right.
But, not everybody's going to behave that way. It's something that you want to hide about yourself because you think that there's something wrong with you because that you have to talk to somebody.
Right. Yeah, I think that that's so true. And that's one of the things, like we were mentioning before, that is really different about younger generations, that they're much more willing to talk about it and be open about it and seek it out, which is exciting. And it's I hope that our older generations like learn from that and sort of adopt that, because we talk about like, oh, I have a meeting, an appointment. Like we never even want to say like, I'm going to see my therapist today.
Yeah.
And I wrote a blog post recently on like how to talk to your boss about like needing to take off time for therapy, because we should be able to have that conversation just like if we had any other kind of doctor's appointment or need or whatever that we might need kind of an accommodation for, but we tend to still think about it so differently. And there's some good kind of directories out there, but again, just to acknowledge in terms of like seeking out and finding a therapist. But what you said is totally right. Like it can feel like a big investment to like make a first appointment and then share everything.
Yeah.
And then what if it's not even the right fit, or what if it, they don't take my insurance, or it doesn't work out in whatever way. It's totally a vulnerable thing. There's some different things out there now that I think are interesting, and, not to endorse anything in particular, because I think it totally depends on what the need is. But I think in mental health, we're trying to think about like, how do we help people access services and care and support in new ways, whether that's through like online therapy or text therapy or different things like that, just to make it more accessible. And for some people, it's kind of a good like entree into like starting to talk to somebody if it's not something they've ever done before, or going to like a support group. So but we have a lot of work to do. We have a ton of work to do in that realm.
So if somebody is connecting with you, listening to this podcast, and they feel like you're the right fit, what's the best way to get a hold of you? And are you accepting new patients?
Yeah, definitely. So the best way to get in touch with me is probably through my website, which is GaliaCollaborative.com. And so it's GALIA Collaborative, or actually on Instagram, which is at Galia Collaborative. And that's actually been a really cool way for me to kind of connect with people as a psychologist, and to like share some of these messages out there, especially with younger people. So yeah, I would love to hear from anybody who even just, wanted to kind of talk more about some of these issues, because they're hard. There's not a lot of discussion out there.
Yeah, that's obviously why I'm doing this podcast, is because I think it's super important, and it is something that just even as an adult, I can talk about this podcast about my binge eating and my body image and losing weight and how I feel, and having, distortion of how I look now compared to before and all these things. But it's not like I'm just turning to my coworker and be like, hey, let's chat about this. It's just giving an opportunity to, open a conversation, to know that, everybody, we all isolate ourselves with these feelings and let them spin inside of us and tear us apart. When if we all just kind of open the door a little bit and saw that we're all kind of dealing with this and having a discussion, that we'd find some solutions, at the very least, feel better just for getting it out.
Totally. Like I often say that these issues can't survive in the light. They only thrive because we keep them very buried and hidden and dark. And so I mean, thank you so much for having this conversation, especially with young people, where there's just such this amazing potential to change the conversation for a lifetime.
Well, and thank you so much for being a part of it. I appreciate you listening and giving me your thoughts and giving some advice. And you're welcome back at any time.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Thank you. I wanted to add that Dr. Solomon also gave a printout of some things that are helpful tips. If you want to keep the conversation going, you can find that at poundthis.com and just look under articles.
For info on health coaching and more, go to AmandaValentineBites.com.